Now it is my pleasure to introduce my good friend Doug Strub. He's going to moderate our next panel, which focuses on AI governance. But Doug is the Director of National Technology and Geoeconomic Affairs at the National Bureau of Asian Research, and he really spent countless hours together with his team putting together this incredible conference. But more importantly, Doug is my travel buddy. We traveled to Korea together several times, and I will tell you, until you've heard Doug sing in a karaoke bar after a few beers and had some Korean fried chicken, you have not lived. Now, please join me in welcoming Doug Strub.
Well, thank you so much, Tammy. I guess I will have to also tell my parents about this. So yeah, thanks again, everyone, for being here. I would like to introduce the panelists, but first, I just want to make sure, Lindsay, if you can hear me and you could go ahead. There you are. Great. So we have a great panelist of AI experts here today. I guess if Ahram and Owen, you want to come to the stage. So we have on the screen Lindsay Gorman joining us. She's the Senior Fellow for Emerging Technologies at the German Marshall Fund's Alliance for Securing Democracy, where she leads their work on US-China technology competition, including efforts on AI, quantum information, 5G and advanced telecommunications, democratic responses to autocratic technology influence, cybersecurity, and transatlantic innovation. Prior to joining ASD, Lindsay most recently served as a senior advisor in the Biden White House at the Office of Science and Technology Policy and the National Security Council, where she crafted US technology and national security strategy and led international technology initiatives through the US-EU Trade and Technology Council and the Quad. And then we're joined here in person by Dr. Ahram Moon, who is a research fellow at the Korea Information Society Development Institute, and her work focuses on generating insights to formulate AI policies, fostering an environment for evidence-based and ethical AI policymaking, assessing the impact of AI on the labor market, and participating in the Intelligent Information Society panel survey. Dr. Moon was also a chapter author in our report that you've heard of, where she authored the Korean Perspective on AI chapter, and she received her PhD in economics from the University of Southern California. And finally, we have Owen Larter, who is Director of Global Responsible AI Public Policy in the Office of Responsible AI at Microsoft. He focuses on Microsoft's frontier AI safety work, working on government and civil society, or working with governments and civil society to identify appropriate governance frameworks so that AI's potential can be realized safely and responsibly. He engages in discussions on regulatory developments across the globe, including in the EU, US, and Asia. And prior to joining Microsoft, Owen worked for the UK Labour Party. He's also co-founder of the Aspen Institute's Next Gen Network, educating future leaders on the challenges and opportunities of AI, and is a term member at the Council on Foreign Relations. So we'll have Lindsay speak first, giving a sort of US perspective on AI policy, followed by Dr. Moon talking about the Korean AI development and policies, and then Owen following up with the private sector perspectives. So Lindsay, with that, over to you.
Thanks so much, Doug. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. I don't know if you're able to see my camera. It seems like it's maybe lagging a little bit. But okay, great. Well, I've seemed to have frozen for myself, but hopefully it's not the case.
You've disappeared now. We did see you.
I see. Okay, well, you can hear me.
Yes.
Okay, I guess we'll have to go with that. Thanks. It's a pleasure to be here and talking with this fantastic panel. I thought, I would focus my comments on questions of what is the U.S. approach to AI regulation and what are avenues for future engagement, particularly with allies and partners, which is a key prong in that strategy. And I would characterize the U.S. strategy as an approach to AI as an innovation-forward regulatory approach. I think it's fitting that we're talking about this today when the EU just passed, finally, its AI Act. which is obviously this sweeping piece of legislation that contains many provisions that probably have commonalities with the U.S. approach. But I think where there's been some criticism of the U.S. is that we're not taking this holistic, overarching view, and instead I think what we're getting is more of a piecemeal approach to the different harms and also the different opportunities with AI. And so, we see that with the creation of the Commerce Department's AI Safety Institute, talking about issues around model security. There's a vibrant and active debate around open source versus closed source AI. But at the same time, we've seen legislation at the state level, for example, to address some of AI harms. And one area that we're particularly focused on now at GMF is AI harms around disinformation and election security. And this is where we have seen some movement at the state level, and where I think at this level is where we're more likely to see legislative action. And these are things around requiring labeling for AI generated content. Obviously, artificial intelligence has been around for some time, but what has burst onto the scene is generative AI, and that's creating a spate of deepfakes and supercharging misinformation and disinformation at a time when our election systems are already incredibly vulnerable. So I would say this is one of the sort of the tip of the spear harms that we're trying to get at, and things like requiring disclosures of AI generated content, but then also on the innovation first approach, trying to embed our democratic values into the technology, including AI related technology that we develop. So we've seen movement around democracy affirming technologies like content authenticity technologies. This was part of the White House executive order. It's been subsequently mentioned in guidance from CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Agency, in reference to election offices, but more broadly, the White House executive order also is advancing privacy preserving AI. So another one of these democracy affirming technologies, trying to square the next generation of technologies that go viral, including in AI, and embed our democratic values into those. So I was really heartened to see those developments, and at the same time rounding off some of the perhaps more pernicious concerns around existential risk with AI, bio-risk, which I think takes me to kind of the maybe the most important prong of the strategy from a national security perspective and a foreign policy perspective, and that's deep engagement with allies and partners. And this is work that we began in the EU-US Trade and Technology Council, as well as the Quad Critical and Emerging Technology Working Group, and continues to this day. Now the US and its partners are engaged through processes in the G7, through the UK AI Safety Summit process, through the Summit for Democracy, to build a democratic approach to the use of AI and figure out where we can align on regulatory approaches and standards, and where we have some differences. And one area I was really heartened to see come out of the EU AI Act, and this is something we worked on a lot in the TTC, is, and I think a relevant topic to this conversation, is making sure that we are putting forward a democratic regulatory framework that looks a lot different from what the PRC is selling around the world with censorship and surveillance. And so the EU AI Act, for example, completely bans social scoring systems, which has been kind of a bugaboo for a number of years now, in terms of the misappropriation of AI technologies, and something that we came out with in the TTC as condemning. But I think our goal from a national security perspective should really be to elongate those differences between the regulatory approach from the PRC and what we do in allied democracies. And here is where I also think that the innovation forward approach can serve us well. I think in the earlier days of AI, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, there was, and perhaps still is, some concern that because China is able to amass massive quantities of data, I had the pleasure of contributing to an NBR publication on China's data ambitions to fuel its AI systems, particularly around personal data, that it might have an advantage in these systems that rely on that rely on the amassing of large quantities of data. I think the coin has shifted a little bit when it comes to generative AI and large language models, because China's regulatory approach starts and ends with state control, as well as obviously a desire for innovation and a desire to lead globally. But because it will have less data to train on in a censored set, I think this is where the United States, has an advantage in this innovation forward approach in generative AI. This advantage, however, does not extend necessarily to some of the applications that are not around language and generative AI. So I think, it's my view that this should be the next frontier for this innovation forward approach. We've said we're investing in national AI research centers. We've seen some great developments around a national AI research resource to extend the ability for labs and technical groups across the country to build on train data and train their models on a national AI cloud, and pioneering into these application areas, whether they're in biotechnology and medicine or advanced manufacturing or drug development. Some of the workforce advantages is really going to be the next frontier of competition, and where I think there's an open playing field applying generative AI in terms of this US-China race. So yeah, to conclude, I would say we're taking the piecemeal approach. I think can seem somewhat disconnected, but the innovation forward attitude and center to it that grounds democratic values is where we need to go, at the same time as we're increasing our innovation and making smart strategic investments along the lines of the CHIPS Act for the next generation of AI technologies, and doing that as much as possible with our allies and partners. So I'll stop there. And sorry about the video. It seems like I'm back, but looking forward to the conversation.
Great. Thank you so much, Lindsay. Ahram, over to you.
Yes. Thank you for inviting me here. And personally, reflecting on my personal experience on participating in policy research so far, I have had a very valuable opportunity to actively evaluate South Korea AI social policies. So I would like to express my profound gratitude to MBR and Doug, and also Professor Lee, who allowed me to contribute as a chapter author, and to my co-author, Cole. Well, as Tammy, who knew about Korea tech policy better than me, I think, pointed out that the information communication technology sector has played a crucial role in driving South Korea's economic growth and productivity, positioning it at the center of the policy interest. With the advancement of AI, its potential as a general purpose technology has been clearly recognized, enabling further development across other digital technologies. This recognition. Oh, okay.
Oh, can you not hear Lindsay?
No, I can hear. I'm just trying to get the camera.
Oh. Okay. All right. So this technological advancement recognition culminated in the presidentialship announcing the national AI strategy in 2019, marking AI is not only as a symbol of technological innovation, but also as a catalyst for the AI-driven digital transformation. Well, in Digital Empire, published by the Columbia Law School professor Bradford last year, the book presents actually 3 policy approaches for gaining competitive advantages in the digital economy: the American market-driven model, the Chinese state-driven model, and the European rights-driven models. South Korea's AI policy can be seen as positioned among 3 models, actually. But this kind of middle ground approach is essential for a country like South Korea, which needs to keep pace with US and China, which is the global leader, AI leader in technological area. So it allows for a thriving AI ecosystem where numerous players can enter the market and compete and stimulate innovation through economies of scale and scope. At the same time, it considers the importance of Europe as a key economic partner, balancing the drive for innovation with adherence to rights and standards. So through significant investment in AI research and infrastructure, Korea capitalized on economies of scale, thereby lowering the cost associated with AI development and enhancing the accessibility of AI technology across diverse sectors. Such scalability is important for promoting broad-based innovation and elevating national competitiveness on the global AI stage. Simultaneously, while the Korea's AI strategy leveraged the economies of scope, recognizing that AI potentials is magnified when applied across diverse fields. But from healthcare to smart cities, well, AI's integration brings about synergetic benefits, enhancing efficiency and spawning innovative solutions to complex challenges. So this multidisciplinary application of AI not only accelerate economic growth, but also improve social welfare, embodying Korea's AI approaches. Well, the success of this digital transformation led by AI hinges on the societal acceptance of technology for its productivity benefits to be fully realized. So this implies that beyond the technological readiness, the widespread adoption and effective use of new technologies require an understanding and trust from society in general. So thus, parallel efforts in education, legal, and ethical framework are crucial to foster an environment where new technologies are embraced and their benefits maximized. So Korean regulatory frameworks, including the national guidelines for AI ethics, illustrated the deep commitment to ensuring that AI development adheres to ethical, transparent, and responsible practices. So these guidelines are important in navigating the complexity in AI integration, ensuring that technological progress aligns with the societal values and human rights. Well, as we have experienced the impact of generative AI last year, the journey towards the future powered by AI transcends the national or regional boundaries, and this makes a global cooperation indispensable. In terms of these perspectives, where cooperation in AI can serve as a means to enhance economic ties, foster innovation ecosystem, and support mutual strategic interests. So I and my co-author Cole actually found that the barriers and recommendations for the U.S.-Korea cooperation on AI policies. So despite this potential for groundbreaking advancement for the U.S. and Korea collaboration in AI, several barriers must be navigated to unlock this synergy. The first and foremost to be found is that it's challenges posed by the differing regulatory environments. Both the U.S. and South Korea could take a more flexible approach to AI regulation, opting for a soft touch approach, both before the strengthened regulation compared to the EU's approach. But the US and Korea each is now developing their uniqueness to AI governance. For example, the Biden administration executive order, which includes a safety framework for AI tools, content authentication, and principles for labor sectors, may have implications for the business and technology industries in South Korea, particularly those targeting to global markets. Additionally, it could influence Korea's government's policymaking in establishing standard systems and ethical assessment for trustworthy AI policies, as well as the preparation of the AI basic law. So these differences can complicate collaboration, making it difficult for AI technology and research to be shared and developed jointly. So moreover, geopolitical dynamics add another layer for complexity. Issues such as trade tensions or the concerns over technological sovereignties and securities can lead to hesitance in sharing critical AI technologies and resources. So to overcome these barriers, I and we address some comprehensive and some multi-phased approaches is needed. But both countries can work together, greater regulatory alignment, or at the very least, interoperability between their governance frameworks. Given the strategic importance of AI, establishing a high-level U.S.-Korea dialogue focused on AI securities and technological sovereignty is crucial. So this forum would address concerns around sensitive technologies, exploring avenue for cooperation in critical AI areas, and establish mutual trust and understanding regarding each country's strategic AI goals. To catalyze these types of collaboration, both nations could commit to emphasize engagement across not only government side, but also civil society. In addition to government dialogue mechanisms, efforts should be made to increase business-to-business ties, joint research, and academic exchange, which will foster closer cross-country cooperation in AI and ultimately facilitate the development of the solution to share the challenges.
Great. Thank you so much, Ahram. It's great to hear both of those perspectives, and now looking forward to Owen sharing the private sector perspective.
Yeah, thank you very much, Doug, and great to be here and wonderful to be able to follow two such thoughtful presentations. So as Doug mentioned at the start, I'm Owen Larter. I'm in the Office of Responsible AI at Microsoft. So this is a team that is headed by our Chief Responsible AI Officer, Natasha Crampton. We've been doing work now since 2017 at the company to do a couple of things. Firstly, develop and implement the company's responsible AI program to make sure that when we're developing and deploying AI, we're doing that in a responsible and safe way. And then secondly, I sit in the public policy team. I lead on Frontier AI Public Policy. I get to take all of the fantastic insights we're learning from inside the company about how to identify and address risk and share that in conversations like this, try and work with governments around the world to create new rules for this new technology. So I thought it would be helpful in my remarks to sort of start by taking a bit of a step back. Actually, Lindsay and Ahram also did this a little bit. Lindsay talked about it being a momentous day today with the passing of the AI Act. It's also almost the anniversary of GPT-4. So tomorrow will be the 12-month mark since GPT-4, this leading model from OpenAI, was brought into the world. It's pretty remarkable if you take a step back and think about what has happened in the last 12 months. If you go back a year ago, we didn't have GPT-4 yet. We had people interested in the technology. We had ChatGPT, a lot of people tinkering, a lot of politicians asking questions, but not much more than that. We certainly didn't have any law or rules in place. If you fast forward to where we are now, we certainly at Microsoft are very excited to see the way in which customers are using our tools, are using our co-pilots to innovate. There's some interesting research from MIT that came out a few months ago that suggested people using ChatGPT and co-pilot style tools could improve their productivity at medium-level research and writing tasks by about 50%. So really big productivity gain. Also really exciting to see how people are using AI to advance scientific breakthroughs. So Microsoft did some work with the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory around identifying high-performance battery materials to replace lithium-ions batteries. Really productive and constructive work. They've identified some new materials. They think that the modeling that they were able to do would have taken them several years to do. If they hadn't used this AI-driven technique, they were able to do this in about 80 hours. This is not theoretical anymore. This is identifying materials that are now going to go into battery production. So progress on the technology front. I think there's been an enormous amount of progress on the public policy front as well. I think we should really give lawmakers and governments around the world actually a lot of credit on this front. They have really dug into the issues and educated themselves a lot on the challenges and opportunities of the technology. You now have laws increasingly in place in the EU, AI Act passing. In the US, the executive order that came out before Christmas, setting in train a number of different work streams, important work going on in place in Korea and elsewhere as well. I think another really important part of this governance discussion is the international coherence piece. Ahram mentioned that in her discussions as well. You've seen great progress on that front as well. So the G7 Code of Conduct that was finalized last year, a code of conduct for developers of advanced AI, that's really meaningful progress towards a type of durable global framework to be able to address the risks and opportunity of AI. The Safety Summit series that was kicked off in the UK at the end of last year is now moving to Korea, the Korea Safety Summit coming up in May. I think there's a lot of opportunity there to continue to advance this work at a global level. There will be a summit in France as part of this series at the start of next year. You have these AI safety institutes which are being stood up by various governments around the world. So the UK started, sort of kicked off this safety institute concept. You're now seeing countries like the US and others also make forward progress there. So we at Microsoft think this is really, really positive. You need a new set of rules for this new technology. We've been talking for a while about the need for a regulatory architecture for the technology that maps to the technology architecture of artificial intelligence. So we think that at the application layer, where people are interacting with AI systems directly, things like Microsoft Copilots, things like ChatGPT, you need to make sure that you are applying existing laws, making sure these systems, if they're being used in a high-risk scenario, are not discriminating, are performing appropriately. It should not be permissible to discriminate in a decision around whether someone gets a loan or not because it's being taken by AI in the same way that it wouldn't be permissible if you weren't using the artificial intelligence. So robustly applying existing law at the application level is really, really important. Then at the model layer and the AI infrastructure or compute layer, we feel that you need to develop a globally coherent licensing regime targeting the really highly capable models like GPT-4 and beyond that are going to pose incredible opportunities for society, but may also pose some risks either through intentional misuse or accident. So we think that model developers developing state-of-the-art, next-generation, highly capable models should have to meet requirements around testing and making sure that these models are being used appropriately. At the AI infrastructure layer, the companies that are providing compute, the enormous amount of compute that you need to train these models and then run these models, we feel there's a really important role in terms of regulatory requirements there as well. We feel that companies offering that infrastructure like Microsoft should have to do so in a way that is secure, addresses potential security risks and people trying to steal these models off infrastructure. And that there's also likely a role for compute providers to play in terms of making sure that companies that are operating on that platform are following appropriate regulatory requirements. One other thing I mentioned, and Lindsay mentions this and has been doing an awful lot of work on this really important issue, this sort of cross-cutting approach that I just mentioned there we feel is really important. There are then other sort of more specific issues that we feel there are really real urgency around addressing. The synthetic media piece is clearly one. I think we're all seeing the way in which artificially generated audio and visual content can potentially be misused or even just generated in a way that is going to mislead. I think there are particular areas of society, whether it be elections or protecting vulnerable individuals like children, where greater care is needed and new rules are needed. We played a role in developing a tech accord that was launched at the Munich Security Conference, placing safeguards around how synthetic media might be used within the context of elections. And so we need to be thoughtful on that front. I think the final point I'll make, and then I'll bring my initial remarks to a close, is just to sort of re-emphasize the importance of building these governance frameworks for AI in a globally coherent fashion. AI is a technology that is the product of many collaborations across borders. The risks that AI may lead to will transcend borders. An AI model that is developed in one country could be used in another country to cause harm in a third country. So you're going to have a globally coherent regulatory regime. We think there's a lot that can be used from other global industries like aviation, for example, about how you can bring countries together to develop global safety and security standards that are then implemented in a globally coherent way. The G7 work is going to continue to be important. The AI Safety Summit series will be important as well. I can share further details as we move through the conversation.
Great, thank you so much, Owen. I have a number of questions. I'm going to try and keep it to a few because I do want to allow time for our audience to engage as well. But to begin with, you've all touched upon how fast AI is moving with the 1-year anniversary of GPT-4 coming up. On the previous panel, Dr. Lee mentioned consulting with business executives who said even their 6-month AI strategies were we're moving, like that's too long of a time period because of how rapid it's moving. So I'd like to start with Lindsay and Ahram from the government side. How should governments be approaching this? How do you regulate a technology that's inevitably going to see breakthroughs that move faster than policy is able to keep up? And do you think the current policies are doing a good job, or what else should they be doing? Maybe Lindsay, I could start with you.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think in the U.S., certainly the Congress has gone through a total fire hose, and I think it's just recognizing that we need to keep learning. Policymakers need to keep learning about these technologies as quickly as possible and as quickly as they are developed. I also think there are a number of efforts underway that have been incredibly effective of getting technologists into government. This is, I think, a long-term objective, something that perhaps China does a little bit better than the United States right now. But things like secondments from technology companies into the U.S. government. One of the big initiatives coming out of the executive order was the scaling up of AI expertise across the federal government. Not just in the places you might think, like the Commerce Department or in the State Department leading our international engagements, but throughout the government, from OMB and the GAO to DOD to the FCC, and recognizing that this technology is going to impact every piece of the government. So I think having that expertise directly in government, there's a great program on the Hill called the Tech Congress Fellowship, which does something similar. So yeah, I do think bringing in that expertise that can then teach the rest of the office, the rest of the policymakers. And I applaud Senator Schumer's efforts to really get the Hill smarter on the issues around AI. I'm skeptical of claims that just say, well, Congress can't understand this, like, let's just leave the regulation up to the tech companies or up to the technologists or the developers. And speaking, as a technologist myself with a technology background, I think it's kind of the height of hubris to suggest that lawmakers, legislators, policymakers are somehow incapable of understanding societal issues around new technologies when they are not experts in. Many lawmakers are not experts. To take Owen's example, in aviation, they don't need to know how to fly a plane in order to make laws of safety around the use of avionics and aviation. So while we absolutely need to, get that talent in, keep educating, I think we do ourselves a disservice if we say that the public and the public's representatives are somehow unqualified to address AI regulation.
Yeah, thank you. Ahram, and is there anything Korea might be doing different in this space as well?
Well, in response to this kind of rapid advancement of AI technology, well, I think the governance and the policymakers should keep their patience. I think I would like to emphasize their patience because we have some experience about the effectiveness of the trustworthy AI policies. Well, this type of policies actually heavily rely on self-regulated. So it requires active participation from all stakeholders in private sectors. So recognizing this, we have actually continuously developed various implementation tools to prevent our self-regulatory ethical principles from remaining just a declaration. So these tools, including ethics checklist or ethical education programs, are tailored for industry and academic applications, emphasizing the collaborative approach among stakeholders from government, academia, and industry. So one example of this effort is operation for universal ethical principles in actionable checklist. So these checklists are policy supported to internalize this specifically for sector like AI-based chatbot and recruitment. One example demonstrating the impact of this effort involved in the Korean startup called ScatterLab, which launched the AI-based chatbot service called Iruda in 2021. Shortly after its release, the service was suspended due to the issues with hate speech and some personal data issues, and that resulted in a large amount of regulatory fines. So following this, the Ministry of the Science and ICT, KISTI, and also ScatterLab actually collaborated to internalize an ethics checklist. And also this collaboration led to the successful relaunch of their second version of services by the last year. So these examples, I think, shows that the government continues to support and interest for private sector striving to implement our ethical principles. And another example is that to respond to this rapid environmental changes is that South Korea also maintaining the dynamic approaches by regulating, reviewing issues through the dedicated task force and the AI high-level committee composed of experts from industry, academia, and researchers. So this ongoing attention has paralleled the active discussions on AI legislation, and it also prompted the proposal of the AI basic law in Korea last year. So this law is currently undergoing public consultation now, and public consultation with the civil society and academia. So I think this is kind of the examples reflecting our proactive and inclusive approaches.
Yeah, thanks. So I wanted to follow up on that with you, Owen. You had mentioned in your remarks making sure you develop AI in a safe and ethical way. And then after hearing Lindsay's comments that policymakers should be capable of this themselves, how much of that responsibility do you think falls on the tech companies in this technology because of how quickly it's moving? Do you think that's a lot of your own responsibility as a tech leader, or do you expect Congress and the executive branch to sort of get ahead of that?
Yeah, it's a really important question. I think ultimately there are mutual responsibilities. Completely agree with Lindsay that governments are going to have to continue to lead. They are going to be the ones to create the rules. We will all follow them. I do think it is important for technology companies to continue to be responsible and to share information about where the technology is going, quite frankly. It's a really tricky balance to strike around how you put in safeguards to obviously address risks that have been identified, but to address the fact that the technology is moving quite quickly. And so you do want to be mindful of putting in place some frameworks that might anticipate risks that are yet to come. It's very difficult to do that. The more theoretical you get, the further off you look. I think the harder it is to do that. I think one sort of distinguishing characteristic of this AI discussion is just how fast the technology is moving, how new the technology is. So this transformer architecture, which is the architecture that underpins a lot of these large language models that we're increasingly using, is only 7 years old. It was developed in 2017 in a paper called Attention is All You Need. This is still very, very new technology. We need to be careful to strike that right balance. I don't think any of us would have thought it would have been a good idea in the 19th century to try and come up with a comprehensive regulatory framework for automotives, and that would be the one time that we'd only sort of regulate the automobile and never have to make adjustments as we go. So this will be an ongoing process, I think, around how we develop frameworks and adjust them. I do think because of that, because the fact that the technology is going to continue to develop over time, we're going to have to come up with some structural mechanisms for information sharing between the different constituencies that have a role to play here. So technology companies have to lean in and share information about what they're doing internally, what is working in terms of addressing risk, where the trajectory of the technology is going. Civil society and academia have an absolutely fundamental role to play here as well, sharing their expertise, and then ultimately governments will have to make rules that we're all going to follow. I think there are some very sensible steps that are being taken on the governance and regulatory front. We've talked a little bit about the US executive order. That seemed to strike a sort of sensible balance in terms of requesting a lot of subsequent research on areas of importance, including synthetic media, actually putting in place some requirements. So if you're developing a really highly capable model, you have to inform the US government before doing that. You have to show that you've done some basic testing to evaluate that model for some potential risks. So those sort of foundational safeguards feel like they are an important and useful first step as we learn more and build out these governance frameworks.
Great, thank you. It's a really interesting answer. I think maybe I'll just do one more and then see if there's any questions from the audience, as I know this is a very hot topic right now, and you all probably have some great questions. But I know Lindsay has been doing a lot of work on the impact of AI on disinformation, misinformation, and election interference. And I think, Owen, you had brought this up as well. It's a big election year. We have the US elections. There's the National Assembly elections coming up in Korea next month, the Taiwan elections earlier this year, and a host of others around the world. So what are governments doing to protect against this, and what should they be doing? I think I'll start with these two again, but then Owen also, as a follow-up, what should the private sector be doing? What kind of role could, the tech sector be playing to guard against these challenges? I guess I could just start with Lindsay again.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I'll talk a little bit about the work that we're doing, and and I think how governments can play into this movement, and definitely applaud the tech accord that Microsoft led and joined at the Munich Security Conference. So we're addressing it along two dimensions. One is appealing to governments, and this is sort of what, in the vein of what governments can do, but at the state level, working with providing guidance to election offices themselves on how to handle AI-enabled content and AI-enabled threats. And so we recently published a handbook. It's called the ASD AI Election Security Handbook, really specifically targeted at election officials in terms of what can they do between now and November to steel themselves and their offices against AI-enabled threats. And we divide those threats into two categories. One, AI-enabled cyber threats, and two, AI-enabled disinformation and misinformation. On the cyber threats, and so we've got about, I'm happy to send it around, but we've got about 10 or so recommendations for election offices. Specifically, on the cyber side, a lot of it is bolstering existing weaknesses in cybersecurity. And so when we think about what can the federal government do, election offices are some of the most under-resourced components of our government across the country. I think they've long since needed more funding so that they can make these upgrades in cybersecurity. I think things like we all do, cybersecurity trainings, building in multi-factor authentication. Right now, only 25% of election websites in the US actually have a .gov domain, which means that that website domain has been verified by the federal government as being authentic. And this has been a problem in the past, but I think in this age of AI, it's going to be only more so, because we're now in an era where sort of the normal tells about whether a website is authentic, does it have good formatting, does the content look right, can be far easier to spoof. And then also on the cybersecurity front, I think we're seeing a rise in AI-enabled ransomware attacks, AI-enabled spear phishing. We've been under threat of foreign influence from particularly Russia in terms of a cybersecurity and information warfare perspective and threats to our electoral infrastructure. I think we do have a very secure election. The 2022 midterms were the most secure elections that we've held. So we're rising to the challenge, but we do have a bunch of vulnerabilities there. And I think there's a concern with generative AI that if you remember back to 2016 and Russia's Facebook disinformation posts, a lot of these, they were bought and paid for in rubles. A lot of them didn't sound so natural in terms of English language. And this is the exact fodder that generative AI can really help with. Non-native speakers producing automated content that sounds realistic, whether it's for disinformation posts or for spear phishing emails that can fool election offices and officials into compromising their cybersecurity. Things like forming election security working groups that have an AI component. Across the US, several jurisdictions have been successful in creating cyber navigator programs whereby election offices pool resources so that the more well-funded jurisdictions can help out the less well-funded jurisdictions. We recommend adding an AI component to this. And then I think also just being able to communicate and understand, what the real risks are and not get too carried away with them. these kinds of wargaming exercises. These are some of the things we recommend. And then the second bucket of work we're undertaking is actually on promoting the adoption of content authenticity and content provenance technologies. And so we're hoping to partner with a major media partner in the context of the Mexico elections, which are in June 2nd, and then taking that forward to the US elections to try to increase the adoption of provenance technologies in coverage of elections. And I think the key, why we're so bullish on provenance technologies as opposed to simple AI detectors is one, disinformation is now moving from the read fakes, the textual sphere into the visual sphere, images and video. We're not really used to being skeptical of images and video, but we're getting there really fast, which has some problems for democracy. And the AI detector tools are just not good enough to provide that sense of security that what we know we're looking at is authentic. And so content authenticity technologies provide these image modification histories so that an authentic source can label all the content that they put out with this authentication stamp, and then the authenticity information will travel with the image wherever it goes. So we're hoping to be able to get to a point where when you see an image without that content, you'll eventually inherently view it as with some skepticism, much like you would an article that doesn't have any citations, that is shoddily constructed. We're obviously not even close to being there yet, but this is what we're trying to push in the context of this historic election year. And I think, we've had some encouraging signs from the U.S. government in terms of their interest in this technology, and CISA's recommendation to election offices to even experiment with this technology. So it does seem like this movement is brewing, and there's a lot more that can be done to seize on, I think, what everyone worries could be this AI election season in the U.S. and around the world.
Great, thank you. Ahram, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, Lindsay already covers all the possibilities to understand this. She is definitely the expert. So, okay. So putting just the additional things about Koreans' approaches to mis and disinformation. Well, as we know that Korea has actual tension to the North Korea, so we already have some cybersecurity issues from the mis and disinformation from the North Korean. So the Ministry of the Defense is already developed those kind of internal guidelines to how to detect the content, especially generated by the generative AI, and also the other part, which is the private for the post-regulation on ICT sector. They also develop some contents guideline to how does the private sector or how public can discern the differentiation from the AI differentiation to dealing with the AI contents and their contents property right, IP. I mean, yeah.
Great, thank you. Quick response from Owen, and then I do want to make sure we get to the audience questions.
Yeah, thank you, Doug. I do think this issue of synthetic media is really, really important and really, really timely. It feels like an issue on which you need action, definitely from companies, but also from governments as well. I think there are a few sensitive areas of society that need particular attention. I think elections is right at the top of the list. Completely defer to what Ahram and Lindsay mentioned, who is doing fantastic work on this. There are going to be a lot of elections this year. I'm reliably informed there is an election in the US at some point soon. Maybe we'll all start talking about it at some point. Korea has elections coming up as well. The UK, my home country, elections, Mexico as well. So there is clearly a live need to address here. That's why we launched this Tech Accord in partnership with a number of others to do a few things really, to allow providing a sort of service and technology to electoral candidates to basically be able to stamp images and audio that they are creating so that people know that it's coming from them. There's more that needs to be done on identifying deep fakes that have been created with an intent to deceive and removing those from platforms. I think there's more transparency that is needed from companies that are creating the systems that can generate this content and the policies that they are putting in place along the lines I mentioned as well. The public needs to know what is happening on this front. So there are certain areas of society where I think special attention is needed. There is then a sort of horizontal set of issues that we feel it's important to address as well. Lindsay mentioned some of this in her comments. We feel that there should be requirements, including as part of regulation for the providers of generative AI systems that are intended to interact with an individual, to disclose to that individual that they are interacting with an AI agent as opposed to a person. We also think that there should be a requirement for companies that are putting on the market AI systems that can generate audio and visual content to utilize state-of-the-art provenance and authenticity tooling. Attaching cryptographically sealed metadata that has information about whether the image was created by a person or not, whether it has been edited or not since it's been created, just to give people basic confidence in the content that they are consuming. The C2PA standard, Lindsay talked about some of this, we feel there is enormous promise around this specification to underpin a lot of this authenticity and provenance tooling. We are rolling it out internally. We've committed to rolling it out in relation to a number of our products. I think what we need to do is make sure that there is an ecosystem around this authenticity and provenance tooling, exactly along the lines that Lindsay mentioned, so that people know to look for the sort of the authenticity check mark, as it were, when they're viewing content into the future.
Great, thank you. I'd like to move into the audience Q&A. We have a question up here from Ambassador Kim to kick it off.
Kiwan Kim, Korea Foundation. I have two questions. AI governance deals with a range of issues, disinformation, safety, military use, and IPR. To what extent, on what subject do you think United States conceive China's part of that regulation? Do you think United States leave China outside the governance? And like early period WTO, you put conditions when China's entry into this scheme? The first question is like this. And the second question, how much antitrust competition rules will apply to innovative business practice and behavior? Particularly, European Union has no industry, leading industry, AI industry, so they are more focused on antitrust and competition rules. What do your opinion, prospects of that rules in the AI governance, and particularly to your opinion, Microsoft, on this issue?
Yeah, thank you. Very good questions. I think to deal with them in order, ultimately you need to have a globally coherent governance framework, I think. I think there is a real opportunity for countries like the US and Korea to lean in and help facilitate that. I've talked about how AI is very much the product of collaboration across borders. I think there is a lot that can be done with the US and Korea and allies, and there'll be certain issues that I think are important to prioritize, like democratic freedoms and how these governance frameworks are developed. It is interesting to see the way in which China were invited to and participated in the UK Safety Summit and signed up to this Bletchley Declaration, identifying some of the risks that AI may pose. Also work going on via the United Nations, obviously a big global body, very representative, that has a lot of countries involved. They have their high-level advisory board advising the Secretary General. Natasha Crampton, our Chief Responsible AI Officer, is part of that. There are also various resolutions that are being advanced there. So I think, there will be certain aspects of this conversation that certain countries need to be involved in, depending on the flavor. But I think ultimately a global conversation is needed. On the competition front, I think this is an important question as well. You need to ensure that you have sort of ongoing dynamism and innovation across the technology landscape. I would say on that front, it is remarkable to see just how much innovation and change we've had in a relatively short amount of time. I think if we were having this meeting a year and a half ago, no one would have been talking about OpenAI or Anthropic or Mistral, which is a leading French developer. So it's not actually necessarily the case that it's only American companies that are leading the way here. Naver in Korea would be another good example. I actually think there is a lot of innovation, both on the sort of productization side, but also on the research side. And if we know anything from the technology landscape, is that it tends to be characterized by continued innovation and often surprising breakthroughs. Again, 5 years ago, I'm not sure anyone would have bet on large language models being the thing that would really capture people's imagination and start to be really useful across society. So there will likely be changes and shifts in the innovation landscape over time as well, I imagine.
Thanks. Ahram or Lindsay, do you have anything to add? And if so, I would ask that you keep it short so we can try and get in another question or two quick before lunch. Ahram, do you have anything?
About China engagement in this environment, well, I mean, it's nowadays, I mean, at least the AI sector, AI part, it's really hard to exclude one nations in this environment. So when we talk about the how we regulate or how we build the framework, I think we have to consider to join these other countries. Even those we actually in the chapter we called these kind of these types of countries like-minded countries in our chapter. So we at this time the like-minded countries even in China China seems like not like-minded countries, but I think our cooperation should be included the China's part in our dialogues.
Thanks. Lindsay, anything to add?
Yeah, just very briefly. I mean, I think there are going to be clearly areas in AI governance where it makes net sense for like-minded countries that exclude China and exclude other autocratic states to define what democratic governance should look like on things like elections, on censorship, on surveillance, where I don't think it's going to be incredibly productive to have China at the table for those discussions. And then there are going to be some other areas that maybe have a more global import, maybe something around some of these safety questions, certainly around AI-enabled biorisk, the threat of AI-controlled nuclear weapons, potentially, AI-enabled weapons. Those might be fodder from when we're talking about some of these catastrophic risks that folks are planning for and thinking about. Those might be some of the areas where we would want a broader tent. So I would divide them up that way.
Great. Any other audience questions? I guess go to Kendra here. Oh, and could you please identify yourself?
Yeah, I'm Kendra Schaefer, head of tech policy at Trivium China. You mentioned the need for a comprehensive kind of holistic architecture, regulatory architecture to regulate AI, but data policy wasn't really mentioned in there. And I kind of wonder, do you feel like we're on the back foot, that the US is on the back foot because the EU and China have already established data protection regimes on which AI protective regimes are built? So do you think, what are your views, as this gentleman said over here, right? Data feeds AI. It's a huge component of this, and we have been taking a bit of a piecemeal approach there. So what are your thoughts on rolling in data regulations to AI regulations?
Okay.
I can start. I'm sure others have good thoughts as well. I think it's a really important part of the puzzle. If you think about what the main sort of inputs are to AI, data, talent, model architecture, and compute. So thinking about the data aspect, I think is really important. I do think there is a need for further progress on robust data protection and privacy law in the US. This is something that we've been calling for a while. Other jurisdictions around the world have made a lot of progress. There is nothing at the federal level yet in the US, although certain states have made some progress. So we would definitely call for the further action there. I think there is also a lot that can be learned from the data protection space and applied to the AI governance discussion, including around the way in which the US government engages on these issues. I think there is a sort of received wisdom that perhaps the US didn't lean into the international discussion on data protection as much as it might have, and the EU did And so you've seen things like the GDPR become something of a global standard. I think it is interesting the way in which the US government is really putting together a strategy on the AI piece to think about governance frameworks. I think one of the interesting things about the executive order as well is it does feel like it sort of strikes a good balance between setting and train a lot of important sort of tasks and further research, putting in place some basic guardrails for highly capable models, notification and testing. Also, on the other side of it, not forgetting that there's a lot of opportunity here and having a strategy for how to actually use the technology. And so sort of the other half of the executive order is tasking various different agencies to come up with a strategy for how they're going to use AI and do so responsibly. But I completely agree with your point that I think data will be an important part of this conversation.
Lindsay, as someone who worked on these.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
no,
if you want to go ahead.
I was going to chime in, but if you have a specific question or angle, happy to take that.
No, I was just going to say you seem highly qualified to answer this question, so I'd love to hear what you think.
Yeah, I'm honestly a little skeptical. I don't think that we're going to have a global, I mean, I definitely appreciate what Owen's saying. And I think that, at a broad brush, we will get some kind of global architecture, but the more people you invite into the conversation, the broader and vaguer it gets. And I just, maybe this is, a little bit of cynicism, but I am very doubtful that we're going to have kind of, one global standard, one global AI regulation. That's not what we're seeing currently. EU, UK, US, China, South Korea, all are doing their own thing. And I think there are ways in which they're going to align. But I actually don't even think that we're going to have the same level of kind of Brussels effect with GDPR, where essentially GDPR got replicated around the world in places from Brazil and across the developing world too. I don't think we're going to see that with AI just because there are so many disparate pieces of it. And, I would love to see data privacy regulation in the United States. Totally agree that we could do so much more there. But again, we've been wanting this for almost a decade now, and I don't know that AI is necessarily going to be what moves us forward. But I certainly hope that we will see something that recognizes kind of more the strategic importance of data in terms of feeding into AI systems, and that can drive some of the data protection frameworks. I'm just not sure we're going to get the needed federal data privacy legislation in the U.S. or one global GDPR-like piece of legislation on AI. Like, I don't think the EU AI Act is necessarily going to be replicated around the world like GDPR was.
Thank you. And we do have an entire panel on data policy coming up after lunch. But that said, I do want to give Ahram a last opportunity here. One thing we covered in the report, and I'm sure will come up, is Korea recently passed some major amendments to their Personal Information Protection Act. How do you think this difference in approach to data policy in Korea is impacting AI there?
Yes, we definitely also updated the Korean version of GDPR, but I also agree with Lindsay's point, which is that we really need to develop some global version of GDPR, I think. Still, there is a different point from GDPR and Korean version of GDPR. So that kind of differences make some confusion in the market and private sectors. And also this could be some trigger to the risky of AI. So I also definitely agree with Lindsay's point there.
Great, thank you. And with that, I don't want to keep you all from lunch, which has been set up in the back of the room, so you can feel free to grab yourself some food and return to your seat or go out in the lobby and mingle. And we will return at 1 p.m. for the next speaker. So thank you to our speakers. Thank you, Lindsay, for joining virtually. Thank you.